Welcome to Powerbuilding, Fund the Future. Brought to you by New Media Ventures, this show dives deep into the transformative work of our founders, partners, and fellow ecosystem leaders who are actively dismantling systemic inequities and building pathways to collective liberation. I'm your host, Abigail Leung, Investment Associate at New Media Ventures. For this season, I'm joined by my co-host, Callie Chamberlain, our 2024 Entrepreneur in Residence. For today's episode, we're tackling issues in progressive philanthropy and challenges that founders often face in their journey of fundraising. We're excited to have Iara Peng and Ross Morales Rocketto joining us today. I'd also like to note that while this conversation remains ever so relevant, there are a couple pieces of it that refer to the 2024 elections, which this episode recording did take place before. Really excited to get this conversation started today. First up, would love to hear from both of you. Just tell me a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Well, hi everyone. I'm Iara, like yada yada yada. Currently, I am the founder of a nonprofit tech organization called JustFund, and we exist to change the way we give so that our communities can thrive. And we are introducing category-defining products that allow funders to move more money with greater equity and trust at the core. For example, we've launched the nation's first and only common grant application platform that has saved organizations a collective 43 years of time doing the paperwork instead of the critical work, and has moved over $300 million. And I'm also a mom of 3 kids, which factors a lot into who I am and the way that I see and approach the world. And Ross, I'm excited to meet you as well.
Well, I'll start by saying that, I have definitely used Yada's platform before and really appreciate and enjoy it. So, as much as one can enjoy having to fill out grant applications. So, thank you for creating it. I'm Ross Morales Rocketto. I'm one of the co-founders of Run for Something, and Run for Something recruits and supports young, diverse, progressive folks who are running for state and local office across the country. Since we first got started, we have over 150,000 people who have told us that they're interested in running for office. We've endorsed more than 3,000 candidates since we first got started, and we've helped elect over 1,000 folks across the country. Feeling really good as we're coming towards the end of year 8. And then, just in my spare time as a side hustle, I was the lead organizer for the White Dudes for Harris Call a few weeks back, which actually, let me start that again. I was the lead organizer for the White Dudes for Harris Call that had over 200,000 people attend and raised over $4.5 million for the campaign.
So impressive, both of you. And I know even beyond these 2 ventures that both of you just spoke about starting, there's so much more in your background. And I'd love to hear from both of you. What inspired you down the path of social justice and activism and entrepreneurship?
Ross, I don't know if you know this, but in my early days, I founded Young People For and Young Elected Officials Network with then 23-year-old City Commissioner Andrew Gillum, who had run and won in Tallahassee, Florida, and we started to build an infrastructure for young people of color to run and serve an elective office across the United States. And our first young people that we supported were Kevin Killer, who ran for state assembly in South Dakota, served 2 terms, and then, most recently was president of Ogallala tribe in South Dakota, and so many others, hundreds and thousands of others, young people who are running. And I'm so excited to hear and learn more about the work that you're doing. But just wanted to say, 20 years ago, we were trying to build, what you've done such an incredible job building and scaling. So thank you for your work.
I mean, we wouldn't exist. We stand on the shoulders of giants, so we wouldn't exist without the awesome work that y'all have done, that y'all did over the years.
Thanks. It's not true, but thank you for saying that. I mean, I do think, we try and we fail, and we try and we fail, and I do appreciate what you're saying, because I think, 20 years ago, we were creating the conditions for philanthropy to support these kinds of efforts and to actually want to invest in a progressive pipeline. and to make the case that leadership development is really important. And, it takes, especially women of color, of course, we know, to run, and you may lose 3 times before you actually run and win. To keep people in that fight and keep people organized and motivated. And so I think, it has been decades of us making the case that leadership development is an important piece of our progressive infrastructure. So I'm so excited for all of us to be able to hear more about the work that you're doing. And I'll just start by saying, for me, I'm first generation American. I was the first one in my family born here. I'm Brazilian Chinese. My parents immigrated from Brazil, and my dad's a chemical engineer, and he would often scratch his head and say, what are you doing with the work that you do here? He couldn't quite understand why I wasn't an engineer. And we spent a lot of time talking about this, but he actually was a political prisoner in Brazil. He was incarcerated for months and months, I think almost a year of his life before he fled here to the United States. And that kind of history has influenced me, right, to make sure that I protected democracy at all costs here in our country, the democracy that my parents came here to make sure my sister and I could grow up in. And I've just had that drive since I was a young girl, wanting to protect those who didn't have a voice, and stand up for those who needed support. And I think my dad also holds like over 100 patents to different things. So he's an entrepreneur, and so am I, but in a different way. And for me, I just really wanted to create opportunities for people to make the world a better place, and it's turned out that the nonprofit space is a great space to do that. So building different things like Young People For, Young Elected Officials Network, PRISM, a nonprofit news organization run by people of color for people of color, so we can really change who tells stories and whose stories we tell. And then the last 10 years, I've really been digging into philanthropy to figure out how we move more money to organizations advancing social and racial justice. So my whole thread in my career has been around advancing social and racial justice, trying to take it, from different angles and really put the right infrastructure in place so that more folks can come in, hopefully after me, and build things better, more efficiently, and with greater success.
That's awesome. My following that is tough. When I was young, parents gave me the option. They used to make me go to church with them every Sunday, and one Sunday they gave me the option, because I think they got tired of going to church, to be totally honest, to stay home and have breakfast with them instead of going to church. And we started a tradition where every Sunday we would have breakfast and watch Meet the Press on Sunday morning. Even as I got into high school and I came home later and later at night on Saturday night, that continued, and caught the political bug really early. That led to being in a high school government class where the teacher basically gave us the option to volunteer for extra credit on a campaign. And I went, instead of just like volunteering for the campaign, I ended up organizing a bunch of my classmates to volunteer on the campaign. Then I ended up organizing a bunch of other high schoolers from across the city to volunteer on the campaign. And then I started organizing people at local colleges to come and volunteer on the campaign. I didn't even know that organizing had a name then. I caught the bug and I ran with it. I worked the presidential cycle in 2003. That was before, now if you're in college, there's structures if you want to take a semester or two off to go volunteer and do a thing. That didn't exist then. I just got really bad grades while I was working on the campaign. And then I walked into a field office in 2005, actually 2004, and started volunteering for a campaign. And started as an intern, and by the end I was the deputy field director for a citywide mayoral campaign in San Antonio. And I sort of never looked back. And I have always felt like change is not inevitable. Change requires people to get up every single day and make intentional choices. And I've always wanted to be one of those folks that woke up every day and made those choices to try to create change. Because if people don't do it, so that's why I do this work. That's how I ended up getting into politics. And I'm excited to continue talking more about all of this.
Amazing. It's so special to hear, I think, both of your personal journeys into this work, because I feel that whenever I talk to someone who is in this space in some way, that it always comes from a very personal
personal place. So thank you both for sharing that with us. I'm curious, Ross, I love what you said about like change doesn't happen just by coincidence. You know, we have to put intention into it. And I'm curious, in both of your spaces, in both of your work, what's kind of the change that you're looking to see and how you're hoping to accomplish that?
Yeah, I think in terms of run for something, and I'll also talk a little bit about the white dude stuff as well, but when we first started Run for Something, the idea was pretty straightforward and simple, which is we don't have a representative, like our democracy is not actually representative of the population that it serves. And we needed to get more young people, we needed to get more people of color, we needed to get more women into elected office because people's lived experiences really matter when it comes to creating public policy. And at the end of the day, that impact is really what the work is about. It's about getting folks into these elected offices at the local level, and especially at the local level, because that's where 70 or 80% of the decisions that impact people's daily lives actually happen. You know, trash collection, streets, you're running water. Like, honestly, if you're really interested in criminal justice reform, like most prisons in America are run by cities and counties and states. You know, now abortion access across the country, you know, those decisions are being made by your state and local officials. And, you know, we just had a bunch of old white people making those decisions, and it was really clear that they were making those decisions. You know, you look at things like rental policies. When you don't have anyone who rents on a city council, you end up with policies that significantly benefit that's a huge problem when like 40-50% of your city is actually renters, but then you don't have anyone serving on your city council that rents. And so it just we needed to get the folks who were closest to like the pain and decision making, and that was really where we decided to get started. And then, you know, in a very different direction, you know, like the reason we organized the White Dudes for Harris Call ultimately was because the Democratic Party for a very long time has not done a very good job of trying to create space for like non-MAGA dudes to be a part of it. And even if it often feels like that is the case, especially with like a lot of the TV ads. The Trump campaign has like really been the only ones over the last two election cycles that have been out there talking to white men. And like just a thing that we know from polling and research is that the majority of white men are actually not like MAGA supporters. They're not radical. And so we had, you know, like part of what we were trying to do is give those folks space to know that they like have a spot on the left, and you know they can play a real significant role in helping elect Vice President Harris, who will be the first Black woman, the first South Asian woman, the first woman president of the United States. And so I think what was even more powerful about it was the fact that it was all of these dudes getting into formation for not another white dude. I think that was like a really special, I think that was a really special moment, and I think showed that like there is an appetite out there to create the space. And the last thing I'll say on that is it's not on anyone else to create that space, it's on white men to create that space, like to do that work ourselves. Nobody else can do that work. It's nobody else's job to do that work. It's our job to do that work.
Ross, I loved so much of what you said, and one thread that I'll pick up on is this concept that I think is so powerful of, you know, you have to start with people who are closest to the issues, or as you said, closest to the pain, because they're closest to the solutions. Right? And I think that's why it's so important to be investing in people who are intimately familiar with the different problems we're trying to solve, right? Because we know how to solve them. And I think for me, you know, why I built JustFund back in 2017 was because I was experiencing the problem, right? As a person of color trying to seek funding for, you know, ways to solve systemic issues in our country, the money just wasn't flowing to leaders of color. And, you know, if you're not aware of the systemic nature of the problem, you can take it really personally. You know, I've got a really good idea. I've got a really great track record here. I have been doing this for 20 years. You know, where's the funding? But it's not a personal thing. It's a systemic problem that we have in this country. You know, there's systemic racism baked into every layer of our democracy, and it's no different in philanthropy. And when you have a situation in a system like philanthropy where about $500 billion is moved to communities, 4% goes to communities of color, you have a big problem that you need to solve. And so how do you solve it? For me, I've just been mildly obsessed with this question, for the past decade or so of like, well, where are the barriers? Where are the bottlenecks? What is preventing communities of color from accessing philanthropic capital, and how can we solve it? And the two places that I became obsessed with changing are the exclusionary nature of how we fund and the expensive nature of how we fund. And the exclusionary nature is, we fund who we know. So when most of the folks controlling the dollars, don't know our communities, it's very difficult to get money moving there. How do we solve that? And then the expensive nature, well, gosh, it can take up to 40 hours for an organization to apply for a grant. They'll get 30% of the time. That could translate into $5,000 just to fund, just to apply for a single grant. Who has that time and who has that money? Certainly not communities of color. So like, how do we solve that? And that's when we, I was actually at Solidare Network when I started to build JustFund, and I got a really in-depth view of an incredible network trying to move money in solidarity with social movements. And if they were having problems, imagine the rest of philanthropy, right? Like we would take in 300 applications, but we'd fund 15, which meant 285 would go in the trash can. And we didn't like that. But how do we solve it? And we landed, on, they gave me a lot of space to build what has become JustFund, which is the nation's first common grant application platform, among many different innovations in philanthropy to try to move more money to movements. And so the change that I'm trying to really create is just to change the way we give, because I fundamentally believe if we can collectively change the way we give, our communities will thrive.
Yeah. I love what both of you are saying, because it's like you're both identifying problems and saying that the money and resources need to go to people that are closest to them to solve it. And then both of you are obviously great examples of doing that. I also wanted to say quickly, Ross, it's interesting because I have a couple white male friends who have said to me, like, we know that the future doesn't include us in a way, and we're okay with that, but we also feel villainized inside of that. Like there's actually no space for us to come in and support. And so a number of them attended your call and felt like it was actually very healing to have a space where people were really vulnerable and sharing, and they felt included. So that thread of community and belonging is really clear in both of what you're sharing and the work that you're trying to bring into the world. I wonder what other types of challenges you're seeing in the philanthropy, organizing, election type of space that you see as barriers to the change that you're both seeking to make in your work.
I think, there are a lot of barriers. And I often think about, how money moves. My favorite class in business school was process flow management, my absolute favorite class. So if we want to nerd out on process flow, I am here for it. And one of the challenges with trying to, like, when I close my eyes and I think about what we're trying to do at JustFund, it's like you put water into a system and you're trying to move it through the pipes, to get to the communities that need it the most. So we think a lot in the visual of dams breaking, and that dam being the, what's holding money back from our communities, and can we break the dam and let money flow? And what can happen if we let money flow to the communities that are the driest, right? The ones that need the most resources. Just let the money go where it needs to go. Can we create that kind of an ecosystem? And what I find is that when we identify and eliminate one barrier, here comes another, right? And so we just are kind of like moving down this process flow to try to see how can we actually unstick the way money is moving. So I think there are, a lot of barriers. I think the exclusionary nature is a really interesting and important one. We fund who we know. And, do communities of color have the same relationships with philanthropy that's majority white led? No. Right? And so how do we actually introduce these organizations to funders? And that's actually why I built PRISM, this nonprofit news organization, prismreports.org. Check them out. They're amazing. But the idea, if you can't see a group, why would you fund them? If you don't know they exist, how are you going to build trust to actually move the money? And trust is so important. And I say this not as trust-based philanthropy, which is an important movement, but I just mean basic trust between two people is so critical to moving money. And if we can see the group and learn about the group, we create conditions for more trust to grow faster, right? So that's like another barrier and a bottleneck that we need to move, in terms of people to get to know the organizations and build trust with the organizations so that we ultimately can move money. And JustFund, one of the things we try to do is take care of the transactional side of grant making. And Ross, we were talking about this earlier, where sometimes it's just, if you know a group and you want to fund them, just fund them. Why have you created an entire system and set of procedures and policies within your foundation to move money? Just move the money. How do we do that, right? So, at JustFund, we say we take care of the transactional through our technology so that funders can do the transformative. You need a really good transactional experience to create the trust conditions to actually be in meaningful relationship with each other so that more money can move later, maybe more quickly, right? So at JustFund, we've built a technology that's by us, for us. We're a nonprofit. We've built this with communities of color, for communities of color, funders and organizations, trying to figure out how we dismantle the system that we've set up and just let money flow.
I would say everything plus one to everything that Yada said. Something I really want to talk about is the ways in which sort of the legal structures that we feel committed to end up actually hamstringing impact. And I've been in a lot of new rooms recently, but a lot of the same rooms that I've been in, we have the same every election cycle we have the same sets of conversations over and over again. We need to move money earlier in the election cycle. It needs to go to groups on the ground. We need to fund off-year organizing so that we can so that the community and state-based groups can start to build trust with their folks so it doesn't feel transactional when they end up getting a huge amount of influx of money during the election cycle. All of those things are problems. I think as I've gotten, and part of my story is that I'm actually in the process of transitioning out from Run for Something, so I'll be leaving at the end of the year. And as I've sort of been in sort of more traditional philanthropic spaces, a thing that just continues to stick out is how the nature of the work and the impact that needs to happen is often the second or third part of the conversation, and the first or second parts of the conversation are okay, are you going to be a C3, or are you going to be a C4, or some other entity? And I think the answer to those questions actually need to come from the impact that you're trying to create, because oftentimes nonprofits aren't good at doing certain types of things, especially when revenue ends up being involved. That isn't to say that nonprofits cannot bring in revenue. They absolutely can. But I think often we don't have a discussion about what is the impact we're trying to create, what is the right structure for that, and what are the right funding mechanisms for those types of things, and what are the right sets of incentives. And so I think one of the big things that we find in philanthropy is the time horizon on impact is super short. Even for the philanthropies that say that 3 to 5 year time horizon on impact, they want to see some kind of outputs before that. And if those outputs if the vibes are off on those outputs, then they may not continue to fund. And there's kind of no way to know what the vibes are going to be. Program officers come in and out. One program officer might have been super invested, another one decides actually I want to take it in a very different direction. And the thing that we get is there just isn't a lot of patience for because the hardest work takes time. Changing hearts and minds, for example, takes years to do. You're not just going to put out a couple of there's all these narrative change campaigns that get money and resources. They're not changing people's minds over time. I think one really interesting example is the National Domestic Workers Alliance and Caring Across Generations, and that sort of orbit of groups has done a really good job of changing the narrative around the care economy. And now we have a presidential nominee of a major party who has the care economy as a major part of her platform. And that's 5-10 years to get to that place. And if they hadn't had donors that were interested in working with them through that change, it couldn't have happened. Now, iGen, who runs them, is a very special person. She's a MacArthur genius. Not everybody's a MacArthur genius. And not everyone's iGen, and so not everyone is going to be able to convince folks to stay involved and stay sort of interested that long. And so I think often a lot of the hardest work has to happen over the course of many, many years, and you don't actually see the impact. And I think sometimes there are situations where different types of money need to be deployed, and the incentives, if you think you can do hearts and minds work, but you also think you can generate revenue, it might actually make sense to start something that's for profit. Mm-hmm. Or it might make sense to have some sort of C3 vehicle that can give loans and recoupable, there's a lot of different ways to do it. And I think we don't have enough creativity in our space around a lot of those things. I think New Media Ventures is one of the organizations that has over the years, but I think most of the time, in most situations, there just isn't enough flexibility often to be able to like get the really hard work done.
I love what you're saying, Ross, just about, just to reinforce what you're saying. I mean, I think conservatives have been so good at this long-term funding. They're funding in 10, 20-year horizons, and we struggle to fund in like 2 to 3 year horizons as like progressives who, in our philanthropic spaces. And I just think it's so important what you're saying, that change takes time, and it's not that we aren't creative or flex. We just can't be under the constraints that we have with the funding. It's like it can take a year to get a grant, as you had said earlier. But then in the next 3 months, show me your impact, and it's like, oh, no, this impact's going to take some time, especially when you're dealing in a high, in tech first solutions. Products expensive. Thank you for your $100,000 grant. I got to go out and raise 10 more of those, to be able to actually make a meaningful investment in the product and be able to test and figure out what's going to work. And we're going to get it wrong more than we're going to get it right. We're going to get it wrong before we get it right, and we need some time. I remember meeting with the funder of coupons.com, and amazing guy, and he was telling me about his journey when I was squarely in nonprofit land, and he had said, well, it took me 5 times to figure out the coupons.com model. And I naively said, wow, how did you convince year over year new funders to invest in you? And he just sort of like laughed and said, no, Yara, these investors invest in me to fail. Because the faster I fail, the faster they know I'm going to get to the winning solution. I'm going to close the doors to things that don't work, and I can go down the path of what is going to work. And what if we had that freedom, right? Where we didn't have to be tap dancing or like, look, it's not working. I'm going to try something new. Keep on investing in me because I'm going to get to the winning solution. What if all of the nonprofit sector had that freedom? We'd be able to get to winning solutions much more quickly and with greater efficiency and much more long-term success. I love what you're saying about that.
Yada, I love what you're saying about like failure. At NMV, we talk a lot about, or we kind of have this saying among the staff, which is fail fast. And I tend to use it a lot, even when I'm making a simple mistake, but it's really changed my personal outlook on failing faster towards that innovative solution. And I'm curious, what do you think for both of you, what do you think the philanthropic space needs in order to get to a place where we can enable like grantees or startups to feel the freedom to fail fast?
I mean, Yada, I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts on this, and I'm sure you're doing a ton of work on it. I'll go quick. The money needs to be flexible. It needs to get out the door quickly. It needs to have fewer strings attached to it. And donors need to think about their philanthropic contributions in a different way. So, when like an individual donor, for example, is like giving, let's say they give to a startup, they're expecting a return on that investment. When you give to a nonprofit, the money's gone. You get a tax break. That's like the sort of transaction that exists there. But the money is gone. Whether the person on the other end is able to pull off what they say they're going to pull off or not, the money is gone. It's out the door. It's spent. And we need to give folks who are, and I don't love the term social entrepreneur because like, I feel like it actually disparages a little bit. Like it just people who start nonprofits are entrepreneurs, and we need to give folks the ability and the flexibility to make some of those mistakes, like you were saying, Yada. I think if you don't have the flexibility to make mistakes, you're never going to find like the right solution to the problem. And I think that is absolutely true for women and for people of color, is they often get a lot less room to make mistakes. Donors often feel like you're lucky to be in the room with me in the first place. And so like, I'm giving you this money. Like you didn't like do excellent work the very, very first time. Like you went out and tried it. Okay, well, like I'm going to like move on to another group. Mm-hmm. And like, that was nice, but yeah, we're just not interested, or we're going in a different direction. And I've seen that happen dozens and dozens of times, where just like young, like women and men of color, like don't get it exactly right. And then the donor sort of turns around and is like, well, like that was cute and nice, and I'm glad that I did that, and it felt good to invest in that person. Now I'm going to like move on to, or now I'm going to give like my, $10 million to whatever super PAC I'm going to give it to this election cycle.
Yeah, I think you're so right. I think this points to what's needed as a big mind shift, in philanthropy. There are all the practices that Ross talked about are so critical to create the conditions for people to feel the freedom to fail, but we need to have a big mind shift around the fear of failure. Because if we can lead with love and hope and joy and all of these things instead of fear, we know we're going to be working better, smarter, and I think there's such a fear of making a mistake or not doing what the donor in this case wants you to do. You stop trusting yourself as the leader who's in charge of solving the problem, right? And you lose confidence in yourself. I speak from personal experience on this. If you're listening to everyone out there and trying to follow the plan you set 3 years ago, if you're not pivoting, you're doing something wrong. You're not learning and taking those learnings and informing your present day. I mean, every single time we do a feature release here on JustFund, we're learning. Did the clients use this? Is this the way they wanted to use it? What else do they need? And if I keep on going down the roadmap that we set at the beginning of 2024 and say, oops, nope, this is the roadmap, we can't change it, I'm not being strategic as a leader. We need to take different inputs. The users didn't use it the way we thought. We need to pivot and turn, and I think for-profits are really comfortable with this kind of agile kind of business planning in a way that nonprofits aren't, where, you can do these tests in sprints in 2 weeks and learn and pivot and keep on growing. It's just not like a lateral, it's not like a path, way to growth and change. And I think we have to get comfortable with a design kind of centered of how we actually build winning solutions and get, feel confident that when we fail, we're learning and we can actually build better.
And that also requires donors and philanthropies to set up their grant agreements in certain ways and to make sure that the money is a lot more flexible, because when you know that at the end of the year you're going to have to spend 10 hours writing this grant report, and you're going to have to report on all the things that you said you were going to do at the beginning of the year, and then you got to the end of the year and you were well, actually we had to pivot and we had to do this other thing, and we actually have all this impact to show. But if the donor isn't cool with that, then that might be the last time you ever get money from them. And so I think
right. Not to mention what they say about you to other funders, right? They didn't agree.
Which is often worse.
Worse, yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's why the things that you're doing, Yada, are really, really important.
I think for all of us to be able to lead in this way of being able to stand in our confidence. I think, Ross, I know we've been both doing this for some time now. So we have just earned confidence, over time, and trust in ourselves, I think, over time. I remember the first time I had a problem to solve and I didn't call someone else, and I just got really quiet and looked to myself for the answer. That wasn't so long ago, but it's taken me 25 years to get to this point, where I believe in myself to find the solutions, and I don't have to go to my mentor, for I still will, but I can learn to trust myself. And I think we have to learn that by failing and learning, we build that confidence. It's a muscle that you have to learn. It's I often say to my children, who we go through multiple stages of metamorphosis, and when I can see them struggling, I just want to cut that cocoon. Here they are, struggling, wrestling with this problem. I just want to cut it and let them out and hold them. And I know that if I cut the cocoon, metaphorically, they'll never develop the wings to fly, right? And so that stage of metamorphosis doesn't happen. And so I think, the struggle is so important for us as innovators, as entrepreneurs. That struggle is so important because it gets us to that next stage where we can rest in that next form and then go to the next stage of transformation. But there are multiple stages of that, and if we're just plodding along based on what we thought was going to happen, just think about the election cycle and where we were with one nominee and now another. But sorry, can't pivot. We're going to keep on the same messaging, keep on the same strategy. We're not going to win. We have to, to get to the winning solution. So it's something that we're comfortable with in other areas of our lives and business and government, but for some reason in the nonprofit sector we want perfection at the gate.
I also think that a thing that philanthropy often misses too is the idea of where the stakes are actually being felt. And so I think it's on multiple levels. When you start an organization, whether it's a for-profit or nonprofit, and you start hiring employees, you become responsible for those people's livelihood. And when you make a mistake and you're in charge, especially if you make a mistake around sort of like, okay, we're going to make a big investment in X or Y, and if it doesn't pan out, the stakes are high. It means that people will lose their jobs. And I think that that often gets forgotten in philanthropy, that like there's a lot of pressure from a lot of different directions on CEOs, executive directors, etc. Most people, most of the time, are not like sociopaths who like are trying, like they're not trying to lay people off, they're not trying to let people go, they're not trying to like contract. When people make a bet and there's risk associated, people are doing the best they can with what they've got and the information that they have at the time. And I think philanthropy also, I think folks who are in philanthropy and individual donors, I think they need to start thinking about those types of things as well. That like, I think they actually need to see themselves in those decisions and feel like they have a stake in those types of decisions, because ultimately, you make an investment, folks sort of say they'll be there with you, and then they're not there with you the next year the way that they said they were, because like there was some other shiny object that came by and they were like, oh, this is what we want to like put a bunch of money in, that has like real long-term ramifications. And I think that I'm not saying that like folks need to be like accountable necessarily, but I am saying that like folks need to think about when they do make those types of investments and people are like, we're going to build an entire thing around this thing. Are you going to be there with us in the next couple of years? And they say yes, or they insinuate the answer is yes, then people are going to plan for that. I've seen that hasn't just, I mean, that's happened to me, but that has, I've seen that happen with dozens and dozens of folks. And the funding landscape this election cycle, has been really, really challenging for a lot of different organizations who I think are having different degrees of this kind of problem right now.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
absolutely.
think what Ross is pointing to, sorry, Callie, I think what Ross is pointing to is, the need for relational philanthropy, to be in relationship with one another where you can build that trust and have honest conversations with each other. And that trust goes both ways. And I think that's really important, Ross, that it's not just the applicant trying to build trust with the donor or the funder, but the funder to build trust with us too, because we are together working towards a common goal. Someone's bringing the resources, the financial resources, we're bringing the intellectual resource, the trust, and we're going to get to this goal together. And we need all of the different parties kind of working together. So I really respect what you're saying there. And I think that it's really important that trust goes both ways, and that for us to get to where we want to go, we do need to be in some kind of meaningful relationship with each other.
I love this conversation. I feel like we could probably talk to you for days. And as we start to bring this conversation to a close, I wanted to ask one more question about what both of you are currently either personally or professionally rethinking.
I mean, I feel like I'm rethinking things all the time. I'm not sure I have like a really juicy answer for you, except for, when you're building a product, you're rethinking assumptions consistently and just seeing what's going to be more effective. So, for example, with my product at JustFund, we run grant cycles for funders, and all of the applications that are filled out go into a library where individual donors and philanthropic advisors can, for the first time ever, search all the applications that apply to Decolonizing Wealth, Newman's Own Foundation, Press Forward, Emergent Fund, Amplify Fund, Omidyar. And I had so many hypotheses about how what is going to be the answer, or what's the right solution or the winning solution that's going to unlock more capital to movement. And I'm consistently rethinking how this product works together and how those two particular features are working in tandem to break the dam and move more money to movements. What are the partnerships that are going to make the most sense? Who's the ideal client? Like, who's going to be early in to this type of an innovative product? So I'm consistently rethinking, and even rethinking, for me as a nonprofit, even though we're generating, 50% of our income comes from fees, we're a nonprofit and a category defining product. So there's no like Starbucks on the corner that says, oh, I should charge $4.50 for a latte because that's 50 cents cheaper than I don't have like that market price set for us. So we're constantly rethinking and figuring out, gosh, what will the market bear? What will people pay for a product like this that's completely innovative? And how are we going to get to that sustainability goal? And do I want to say goodbye to philanthropic capital? Because what is going to be my path then to innovating and continuing to build out a product? So, I mean, I think, for us, it's rethinking around like a lot of different parts of this model. who's the right client, what applicants do the best here, and how fast do we grow? And one thing I'll say for anyone who's building anything in product knows it's always slower than you think, much slower than you think it's going to be to build something that you want. So I think I'm kind of rethinking those pieces. And I think, rethinking the model, like, for example, at JustFund, we started out being a managed service. We would have a people first service. And we're moving to a SaaS model, where it's a software as a service, and we want that software to be easily utilized by folks. It's a self-serve product. That means we can have not 180 funders, but 1,000 funders in here if we can truly build a SaaS experience for folks that allows them to navigate the product on their own. Then I don't need 100 customer success managers, and it's an actual a scalable business proposition, to be able to bring in more funders who really, really want an equitable grant making solution, really want to center trust and equity at the heart of the way they fund, how they fund. So there's a lot of rethinking that happens in my day to day. I don't know if that's a satisfying answer, but it's what I have. What about you, Ross?
That was a good answer. I'm in a really generative space right now because I'm leaving I'm in the process of transitioning out of the organization I helped co-found 8 years ago, and we didn't even, that's a whole other podcast episode. I mean, you've done it a couple of times, so actually I might send you an email after this.
Please do.
But because I'm in a really generative space, I'm sort of like rethinking everything right now. I think to go back to something I said a little earlier, every 2 to 4 years, I sit in the same sets of rooms and I have the same sets of conversations with folks about what the problems are, what we need to do differently next time. And I think something that has really stuck with me over the years is the lack of durability that our work seems to have. Every single year, we have to spend billions of dollars to win elections. And if we don't spend that billions of dollars, the chances that we lose that election are high. And also, the money is just getting pissed away because it's not building a lot of it, a huge amount of it is not building long-term power. A huge amount of it is going into TV ads. And a thing that I'm thinking about a lot right now is like, how do we change people's hearts and minds? And the answer that I keep coming back to is that while politics is a part of culture is much bigger than politics. And I think we're not getting to people in the places where they are. We're not getting to them with the messages and the messengers that we need to get to them with. We spend so much time thinking about things through a political lens in this work that we often forget that once people's political brains turn on, like, we kind of lose them a little bit. It gets way more difficult to move people. And so I'm thinking a lot about sort of like the power of culture, the power of getting to people in the places where they actually spend the majority of their time, and getting to them in ways that are respectful, like rooted in love, but are also not going to get their lizard brains activated. And so those are the types of things that I'm spending a lot of time thinking about right now, and will likely be reflected in my future work. So TBD.
Thank you both for joining us. Before we let you go, tell the audience where they can find you.
Well, if you're a funder wanting to change the way you give, you can come to justfund.us, www.justfund.us, and come on over and check us out. I mean, there's a big, brave, and bold community of folks who are changing the way they give, and we have a lot of different tools and features and ways for you to really unlock money for good. And, this is a platform really that we're building by us, for us. So we're really building this together. So I hope that you'll come over and check us out. And if you're an organization, or you're a project, or you're a fund seeking funds, also come to our website and log in, put your application in, and see if you can find some funding opportunities that'll be good for you.
Yeah, if you wanna make a contribution to Run for Something, you can go to runforsomething.net/donate. If you want to volunteer for Run for Something, you can go to runforsomething.net/volunteer. If you want to find me on social media, I'm still on Twitter. And sorry, you can probably hear my 3-month-old puppy in the background. She's been really good through this entire taping. You can find me at Ross Mo Rock on Twitter. Feel free to shoot me a DM, or just reach out. I'm always happy to have a conversation.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. We'll talk to you soon.